Hey painters! Today I thought it would be a lot of fun to go back to the beginning and show you some of the things that I learned when I first started painting, some of the little tricks that I've learned along the way to make it a little bit easier, and some of these you'll probably know already, some might be new to you, and some of them you might figure are just useless, but we'll just cover those things and see how you like them. First of all, I want to talk about our wood piece. Years ago, it was very difficult to get wood that didn't have a lot of knots in it. And usually whenever you see knots, you're going to have pitch. And so we had to think of a way to accommodate and to get rid of and to block that pitch from bleeding through the paint. Chroma in the Josonia line came up with what they call tannin sealer. And the instructions are on the bottle. They do indicate that you should put the tannin sealer on the knot at least 14 days before you're going to use it. So if you have a piece of wood, generally that's going to be pine. If you have that and you have knots in it that you think are going to bleed pitch into your painting, you'll want to make sure you treat that with some tannin sealer or another product that you might find more helpful. Generally, I'm going to look for wood that doesn't have the pitch in it. Nowadays we have a good supply of nice wood that the woodcutters use. We also can paint on masonite. We can paint on the laminated wood that doesn't have any grain in it at all. So you just have to be careful. If you do have a knot, you're going to want to treat that. If I'm painting on wood that does not have knots in it, then I'm just simply going to use the all-purpose sealer. And the all-purpose sealer seals up that surface, helps the paint to stick to it better, and it also helps the decorative paint to stick to the base color paint better. When I get a piece of wood fresh from the woodcutter, I generally don't sand it unless it's very, very, very rough. I like to put one coat of paint on and get that dried, then sand the wood. That way I feel like I have filled up some of the surface texture, and it's going to be smoother once I get the coat of paint on and sand it. Then I'll do my second coat. Generally you'll get it from the woodcutter. It's going to be dusty, dirty, so you're going to want to wipe away that dust. I do not use, and I highly recommend that you don't use a ready-made professional, what's called a tack cloth. You can buy those in hardware stores and paint stores. They're it's a fabric that has a very sticky substance on it, but it is a petroleum-based product. So when you put a petroleum or an oil-based product on your wood, that's going to set up a barrier, and your acrylic product will not stick to it. So what I generally do, you can use one of the, cut up a piece of the chamois, artificial chamois cloth. You could use something like these microfiber cloths. They would work. But I take my retarder medium. This is just the plain Josonia's retarder medium. And I will take my cloth and just saturate it. You don't have to completely drown it, but you would just take your retarder medium, put it on here like so, and smoosh it around. And then I keep that in a Ziploc bag so that it stays fresh for me. If it gets really, really dirty, you can always wash it or throw it away. And a lot of times I will take it and outside. I'll take it outside and just shake it off, shake the dust off of it. It will last a long time. If you like to keep things nice and clean better than I do, then you can wash this or you can throw it away and get another one. So you're going to take that cloth and you're going to wipe your surface. The other nice thing about using the retarder medium is that it's going to blend and work well with your other Josonia paint. So I'm just going to wipe that down and make sure I don't have sanding dust on it. And put that away. When I want to put paint on my piece, I like to use I like to recycle these meat trays. They come in all different colors. And I like to mix my all-purpose sealer with my paint in the beginning. It just saves one step rather than painting the all-purpose sealer onto the board to begin with and waiting for that to dry. Generally, for my first coat of color, I'm going to put out about 3 parts paint to 1 part sealer. So in my meat tray, I'll just squeeze the paint out and squeeze out some sealer. I'm not too picky about measuring that and making it just perfect. But I'll mix those two together. For my techniques and the way that I paint, a little bit of texture on the surface that we call tooth is very, very helpful, almost necessary for my techniques that I use. Many times I have painters in my class that have painted and sanded their surface till it's very, very smooth, but they find in class it's difficult to paint on that surface. So we want to create just a little bit of tooth. Some people call it an eggshell finish. Here's a little trick that I kind of came across or kind of developed as I was painting for so many years. Instead of just starting out right on the top and then having to do the sides, the edges separately, I generally do the sides first. That way I can roll this on and move my hand around so that I can get the sides as well as the flat surface all at one time. For me, it's all about getting it done as quickly as possible with a few steps. Alright, now when you do this with a roller, it can build up. Whoops, my roller doesn't want to stay on there today. These rollers can be purchased at paint stores, variety stores. They're pretty easy to find. They're called trim rollers, sponge rollers. Different stores call them different things. Generally, they're going to stick a little bit better than mine is sticking. I think my little handle is getting worn out. Anyway, when you do the sides, a lot of times you're going to have a little bit of spillover onto the back side. So you just want to go along and make sure you don't create a little ridge of paint there. So I would just go along and make sure I smoothed out the back side. Then we'll be ready to deal with the front. I'll go back into my paint plus sealer and just roll that all into my sponge. And we'll just roll this on the board. Now, in the old days, we were taught that you always paint with the grain of the wood, but when you're using a sponge roller, it's not so important to do that. And I really don't, my goal when I'm painting is that I want to get rid of as much of that grain as I can. So I'm not necessarily going to roll right with the grain of the wood. Get just a little bit more. And it seems as though you're going to be using a little more paint when you have to fill that roller up. But by the time you get it full, you should be able to then just pick up a little more paint for the next coats that you're going to put on. So I would let this dry, and I would then do the other side, depending on what the object is. Do the other side, and then you would take that and sand it. That way you have kind of raised and filled some of the texture, especially on these edges, and it makes the sanding go much faster and much easier, and plus it's a lot more, it does a better job. So it cuts out one step out of the process, and I think it makes for a better product. Now, you only have to sand it, you know, wherever it's rough, you're going to sand it pretty well. But otherwise, you just sand it lightly. Then you'll be ready to put your second coat on. I put my second coat on the same way, with a sponge roller. So you're not going to want to wash your roller out right away. You want to save that so that you can put your second and maybe third coats on. I'm probably going to pick up some discarded plastic bag, put it in the plastic bag and save it until I need it for the next coat. I'm not going to wash this because there's a lot of paint in here that would be wasted if I washed it out. So I'm just going to put it in a plastic bag, or you could wrap plastic wrap around it, just the kind of plastic wrap that you use in the kitchen, or if you have bags from the grocery store, whatever kind of plastic bag, you can stick it in there until you need it again. Once you have your second coat on, you should be ready to go ahead and put your pattern on. You might, if you have a very rough surface, you might have to sand it one more time lightly. My recommendation is, if you don't get the coverage that you want with the second coat of paint that you roll on, then I would sand it lightly on the painting surface before I roll it again, because you can build up a little too much texture and you don't want to do that. And while I'm speaking about building up too much texture, the Gelsonnia paint especially, it does not have a sealer in it. So when you're prepping your surface, you want to make sure that you're putting your all-purpose sealer in your paint, so that when you go to paint your decorative design, you will have a sealed surface that you're working on. If you don't have that sealed surface, it's going to be very dry and very grabby, and it'll be difficult for you to paint your design work. So then once that's all dry and ready to go, then I will go ahead and put my pattern on it. Now, a word of caution. You'll see that for me, at this point right now, for this demonstration, I'm using all of the same product line. Whatever product you're using, if you are going to mix brand names, like let's say you're going to use a sealer of one brand but a paint of another brand, then you want to make sure that you test that on your surface, maybe on the back side or on some throwaway piece of wood, so that you know that those two brands are going to work well together and not cause you some problems down the road. Well, I think that we're going to have our board here. I'm going to set it aside and let it dry. I'll give it the second coat, and then I'll be ready to put the pattern on for the next demonstration. Remember that if you want to see my terms and techniques in writing form, I have a pattern packet available called Terms and Techniques, and most of what I talk about in the demonstrations are in this packet. So we'll call it a day for today, and I'll see you next time. In the meantime, I hope you paint happy.